another Toothpickings. I'm the Toothpicking Poet Laureate, Brian. I've been doing this far too long, and it's no end in sight. I take that back. There's going to be a few more of these this season, and then I'll be taking a break. I'll be going back to the coffin for a while. But don't worry, there's going to be a few more of these videos, and then we can all find some other things to do in our lives for a while until either Toothpicking Season 5 or, COVID kills all of us. We'll see. We'll see what happens. So what should we talk about today? I thought maybe this guy, Lord Byron, this tripod of a poet who was every bit a twat as he was a talent. If you've followed my other Toothpickings, then you know that he looms quite large over vampire literature. It's fair to say every major vampire is based on him. Not every vampire is based on him, but all the vampires you like are, so. There's a word for all those charming, magnetic, erudite, brooding vampires that we know. It's the Byronic vampire, and it's the most popular type of vampire ever created. But that's not what I want to talk about. I don't want to linger on that. I want to linger on references to the actual dead, grabby hands Lord Byron in vampire literature. So let's walk through a few of those, and maybe by the end of this, I will piss you off and you'll never come back and I won't have to do any more of these. So let's see. Now, at first that was easy because we didn't have to look any further than Byron's poem, The Giaour. And I know it looks like Giaour, and that's how I say it too when there's no one around to laugh at me. But it's got some Big Fang energy. Listen to this. But first on earth, as vampire sent, thy corse shall from its tomb be rent, then ghastly haunt thy native place, and suck the blood of all thy race. There from thy daughter, sister, wife, at midnight drain the stream of life, yet loathe the banquet which perforce must feed thy livid living corse. Thank you for all the beat poetry snaps. I appreciate it. It's pretty easy to catch this poem in the early vampire works. It appears in both Polidori's The Vampire and Darcy's The Black Vampire, the first two vampire novellas. And of course, some 8 decades later, it appears in Dracula, because Dracula is the vampire crosswalk where we all have to rub shoulders with each other. It also appears in the longest vampire novel, Varney the Vampire. And I'm not smart enough to have caught this myself, so I have to acknowledge Edward Pettit at the Rosenbach Museum, who noticed the quote in Varney, but also realized that it was a misquote. In Varney, there is a quote from the Giaour that says, "Decay's offensive fingers," when it should be "Decay's effacing fingers." So we're going to give Varney that credit and say that, yes, they were quoting Byron, and Byron exists in the world of Varney the Vampire.
Varney the Vampire, or the Feast of Blood.
All of this brings me to the penultimate reason I even wanted to make this video in the first place, and that's to talk about the mama dragon of 20th century vampires, and that's Anne Rice. I'm not going to lie to you and say that I reread all of Anne Rice's books just to see if she quoted the Giaour or Byron at all. I've lied to you about enough already. Okay, so I did like a word search with some of the books that I had in an online form. Couldn't find anything, except that at one point Lestat describes a house or a building as being Byronic, and I don't know what that means. I don't know if the house was, goosing debutantes, or if the house had a laudanum problem, or what it was. But she's Anne Rice and I'm not, so if she says a house is Byronic, a house is Byronic. It's not a slam dunk for placing Byron in the same world as Anne Rice's vampires, because, okay, so let's say that you're working on your sci-fi novel, and in your sci-fi novel you have an alien cyborg that you describe as being Frankenstein. Does that mean that in your space cowboy adventure, Mary Shelley also exists? Maybe. This is what I do when I'm trying to do a shrug emoji. Maybe. But that's okay. We don't have to rely on that one Byronic house. because Anne Rice worked Byron into the Vampire Chronicles, just not in the books. Do you remember the 1994 Interview with the Vampire movie starring Thandie Newton with supporting cast by Tom Cruise and Brad Pitt and Christian Slater and Antonio Banderas and Kristen Dunst? That movie, before it took the form that you see with a lot of script punch-ups by Neil Jordan, Anne Rice wrote her own screenplay adaptation that came in at a whopping 180 pages. That is an endgame length movie. You could watch an endgame long Interview with the Vampire if that script had come along. And if your ass is tired of listening to me drone on here, just imagine if I went on for 20 times the length of this video. That's severe. Buried in this boat anchor of a script is a little tiny reference where Louise and Lestat go into a house and Lestat grabs a bunch of novels off of the shelf and tosses them to Louise. One of them is an unnamed Lord Byron novel, which means that the vampires know of and appreciate Lord Byron, because of course they do. They're vampires. They're awful people.
What's that one?
It's a coffee.
Well, so it is. You must be dead.
That's it. That's, I feel like I built that up a little too much for that one small payoff. So if you'll give me the space, let me see if I can tie Lord Byron to the newest, really, really, really big vampire tale, and that is Twilight. Bye. Thanks, it was nice to have you here. For anyone who's still left, let's talk about Twilight. I do not know of any quote of Byron in the Twilight novels or any direct reference to Byron. Clearly, Edward is a Byronic vampire. There are people smarter than me who have argued that he is more Byronic than many of the past vampire heroes, anti-heroes, and villains. That in some ways he's the most Byronic vampire. That be as it may, what we're interested in here is, are there direct quotations? Is there an acknowledgement of Lord Byron actually existing in Twilight? I have not found one, but I do have something that I think might tie it all together. And if you'll give me the space, I'd like to try this one out on you. Because Lord Byron, when he died, was working on a very long poem called Don Juan. Yes, it looks like Don Juan, just like Giaour looks like Giaour, but I have been assured that it is Don Juan. I don't know, pronunciation's a weird thing. And what's fun about Don Juan, and the whole reason I'm bringing up this Byron poem, is because one of the cantos is popularly referred to as the Twilight Canto. The word twilight appears over and over and over again in this poem, and here's a stanza from the Twilight Canto. Sweet hour of twilight, in the solitude of the pine forest and the silent shore, which bounds Ravenna's immemorial wood, rooted where once the Adrian wave flowed o'er, to where the last Caesarian fortress stood, evergreen forest which Boccaccio's lore and Dryden's lay made the haunted ground to me. How I have loved the twilight hour and thee. Byron's poem, with its allusions to haunted ground and enchanted forests and windy shores, does that not bring up in your mind some of the images you're familiar with of the Pacific Northwest as they are portrayed in the Twilight novels? And let's not lose sight of this other thing. Don Juan is about a woman wooing a man instead of the more classic man wooing a woman that was popular in those romantic poems. So, is there anyone in the Twilight novels that reminds you of this setup of a woman really trying to pull a man in, particularly a Byronic male in? Now, I'm not saying that Stephenie Meyer was a big consumer of Lord Byron or early vampire literature. I don't have to, because Stephenie Meyer herself has said that she does not read a lot of vampire fiction or watch a lot of vampire movies. So what am I saying here? There's no direct connection. She wanted to call the book Forks. Twilight came up in some sort of editorial meeting. I just think it's an incredible cosmic improbability that Lord Byron at his death, Lord Byron, who looms so large over vampire literature, had a canto called the Twilight Canto that says the word Twilight over and over and over again, and the biggest selling vampire fiction of the 21st century is called Twilight, and smack dab in the middle there's a Byronic vampire. I just think it's kind of cool. Listen, this isn't literary detectives with toothpickings. This is just me looking at what's available and saying, isn't this interesting? This cosmically rhymes. Buy it or don't buy it. I like it. And I needed to tell somebody about it. So thank you for listening. There is more toothpickings on the way. There is at least one really good interview coming up this season before we close it down. So I hope you stick around and join me for that. Until then, just keep wearing the mask. It's not that big of a deal. No one can see your fangs when you're wearing a mask. That's the tip.